Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Capital Carnage. As you can see, I've had a something of a change of venue. We could blame that on the current events that are going on at the time. It's just a little easier to do this from this location than to try to explain to my local PD why I am heading across town at this time of night. That being said, we're getting into we are rounding out the Bill of Rights with the last amendment in the Bill of Rights. That's right, Amendment 10. And the 10th Amendment says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And in case you're not clear on what that means, it's another really, really simple one, but in a lot of ways it's also a really, really complicated and convoluted one. Because what this is essentially saying is any and all power that is not expressly granted to the federal government in the Constitution, therefore falls to the states or to the people. But what it does it essentially allows each state to write its own constitution to work in injunction with the federal Constitution. And you really start getting into the weeds on states' rights and whatnot when you get into this, and it's not always 100% clear what is correct and what is not correct. We famously fought a war over states' rights because the southern states believed that the 10th Amendment actually allowed for them to be able to rebel against the federal government when the federal government wanted to end slavery. They believed that holding states was their right, and it expressly said so in many of their constitutions, and they seceded from our country in an effort to essentially stand by or defend what they viewed as, many of them quoting the 10th Amendment, which I know seems very absurd to us now, these, 100 or so years later. We're well past 100 now. We're coming up on 200 in a couple of decades. But it's not, back then it was a very hot button issue. Of course, slavery had been a hot button issue for over 100 years before the Civil War even came to pass. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back, essentially. But even now, in today's climate, we have things happening that call into question just where the federal power ends and the state power begins. So as if you're watching this years from now, you may be confused. But what's going on right now is we have a nationwide stay-at-home order because of a virus that originated overseas and made its way over here. Spreads very quickly. Apparently very contagious. How deadly it is. The opinions seem to vary. Seems to be very dangerous to old people, perhaps not so dangerous to young people. That being said, so there's been a quarantine. Only essential personnel have been allowed to leave. So I myself have been one of the lucky ones. I've still been able to go to work. But for instance, I'm here because I'm not able to go to the space that I normally use as my studio. So that being said, the federal government wants to reopen our economy, because our economy is taking a severe hit because so few people are working. And that's a real hit to our economy, which was doing quite well. And you don't want to stay on lockdown for too long, otherwise you could do irreparable damage to the economy. So the federal government wants to open back up, and you have the federal government even laid out a plan of, a three-stage plan of, if you have only X number of people, X number of cases, yada yada, then you can graduate to this plan. It's basically a guideline for the states on a suggested guideline for the states on when it is safe for them to open themselves back up for business. The thing of it is this is where the question comes in, because, for instance, if the state of Montana, which I believe has the least number of cases of this virus in the United States, if the state of Montana, if the governor doesn't want to reopen, if he doesn't want to lift the quarantine, despite the fact that he meets the president's criteria for reopening, the question becomes: does he have to? And I'm hearing people say yes, the president has the final word. I'm hearing people say no, the governor has the final word. I mean, it makes sense to me personally that it would be the president would have say over our federal borders, and that the governor himself would have say over the state borders. So, while technically I think the final word does come down to the governor, it's a strange situation, but this is this is an example of where the question of federal power versus state power really comes into play. But this is what one of the other parts of the 10th Amendment that that it says there at the end, or to the people. The problem is depending on where you live, what state you live in, the state may not have left much in the way of powers to the person. Some states like to really regulate their people like mad, and while others allow you more autonomy and more freedom. A good example of this would be, for one thing, states like Connecticut and Massachusetts, you have to pay a large sum of money and take a test, pass a test, background check, yada yada, whole big thing in order to get a permit in order to exercise your Second Amendment rights. Whereas in a state like New Hampshire, Vermont, or Maine, while a background check is necessary to buy a firearm, there is no permit. The United States Constitution acts as your permit, as it should. But again, this is there's a big difference between different states as to how much freedom you are actually still left with, how much of your own power, so to speak, that you are actually left with. So that being said, that has been the 10th Amendment. I've been doing a lot of legwork leading up to my next project, and I'm not going to talk about it here, but there will be a video coming very soon that will explain the ins and outs of my next series that will be going on this channel. So that being said, that's the Bill of Rights. I encourage you to again go through the other Bill of Rights videos. So very important. The Constitution, as I've said many times now, I'm sure, the most important document possibly in our nation's history. And no matter what somebody tells you, no, it's not outdated. No, it doesn't need to be rewritten. If anything, it needs to be reread and taught properly. But for good or for ill, that has been my series on the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution, otherwise known as the Bill of Rights. I want to thank you for being with me through this. I am looking forward to bringing you my next series, And you can find me right here on YouTube. Thank you for joining me on Capital Carnage. Until next time, remember, Si vis pacem.